Hello science fans and welcome to SHE-ensya. Today, we're going back to basics and talk about life on planet Earth, focusing on the history and evolution of animals. The history of animals spans 500 million years, and so far, we have identified more than 1.3 million species. And yet, there's so much more that remains unknown. It's interesting that the common ancestor of all animals lived during a time that's called the Ediacaran Period, which occurred 571 million to 539 million years ago, which was about the time when the first non-microscopic multicellular creatures emerged. This ancestor of all animals was a burrowing, wriggling, worm-like creature that we now call the Eukarya. During this Ediacaran period, the world was chiefly populated by amorphous undersea blobs, and most Ediacaran animals died in a mass extinction event, leaving no links to modern animals. Eukarya, however, is an exception. Fossil records show that its burrows persisted until the Cambrian period, which is significant evidence that it could have evolved to turn into modern animals. But when it comes to the common ancestor of all humans, our genetic Eve, the mother of all humans alive today, she is approximated to have lived about 120,000 to 156,000 years ago. Her existence was discovered using molecular techniques that look at our mitochondrial DNA. Most of us know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. But did you know that it also contains unique DNA segments that is almost exclusively passed down from mother to child? By looking at unique mutations in the mitochondrial DNA, scientists were able to trace the common ancestor of all living humans in the planet. If you want to know more about how the information in our DNA is studied by scientists, please watch the SHE-ensya video that will pop up here at the end of this one. Now going back to our genetic Eve, she is believed to have lived in East Africa, and she is defined as the most recent woman from whom all living humans descend in an unbroken line purely through their mothers and through the mothers of those mothers, back until all lines converge on one woman. Please take note that the genetic Eve is different from the biblical Eve. She was not the first human woman to have ever existed, nor was she the only woman who lived during her time. She is instead the mother to an unbroken line of humans that was able to survive across the hundreds and thousands of years that we existed on planet Earth. Now, one of the key tools that allowed scientists to study the history and evolution of animals was the fossil record. A fossil record is basically a group of fossils which have been analyzed and arranged chronologically and in the order of biological relationships. The richest source of fossils would be sedimentary rock, a type of rock that is created by the accumulation of minerals and organic material on the surface of the planet, followed by a process known as cementation. Now, to determine the age of fossils extracted from sedimentary rock, radiometric dating is done. Radiometric dating is based on the principle that a radioactive parent molecule known as an isotope would decay constantly over time. While the moment in time at which a particular isotope decays is unpredictable, the decay happens exponentially at a constant rate called the half-life, usually given in units of years when discussing dating techniques. After one half-life has elapsed, half of the atoms would have decayed into a daughter nuclei that is radioactive itself. This will result to the creation of a decay chain that will eventually end with the creation of a non-radioactive daughter molecule. The predictability of half-lives allows the relative amounts of related nucleides in a sedimentary rock to be used as a clock to measure the time from when the material was first introduced into the rock until the present time. Using a collection of fossil records known as the geologic record, we have established snapshots of the Earth's past that are characterized by unique events. We begin with the Hadean Eon, named after the Greek god and ruler of the underworld, Hades. It is the oldest eon and dates from 4.5 to 4 billion years ago. This time represents the Earth's earliest history. At this point, the Earth is basically a molten surface characterized by a lot of volcanic activity and asteroid impacts. No life existed on the surface of planet Earth at this time. This was then followed by the Archean Eon, the earlier of the two formal divisions of Precambrian time, which happened about 4.6 billion to 541 million years ago, and this is the period when life first formed on Earth. The life formed during this period were simple, single-celled organisms known as prokaryotes or bacteria. They basically created energy without the use of oxygen through a process known as anaerobic respiration. Interestingly, some of these simple organisms were capable of doing photosynthesis to create their own food, and this caused the first release of oxygen into the Earth's atmosphere. The first instance of photosynthesis and the so-called oxygen revolution that happened afterwards occurred sometime at the end of the Archean period, about 2.7 billion years ago. The introduction of oxygen into the atmosphere was detected by scientists through the observed rusting of iron-rich terrestrial rock. Because you see, rusting is an event that can only happen when iron is exposed to oxygen, and we can typically observe it when normally gray or black materials rich with iron turns red or orange. The large-scale increase of oxygen in the atmosphere led to the extinction of a lot of prokaryotic organisms who couldn't tolerate oxygen. And this led to an evolutionary event that caused the survivors to now use oxygen to create energy from the biomolecules they eat. This is now a process that we call aerobic respiration. And now we move on to the Proterozoic Eon, the younger of the two divisions of Precambrian time that extended from 2.5 billion to 541 million years ago. During the Proterozoic Eon, the atmosphere and the oceans changed significantly, and this is when many primitive life forms like new bacteria and algae came to existence, together with oxygen-dependent animals known as the Ediacarans. It was also during the Proterozoic Eon when the first eukaryotic cells were found, approximately 1.8 billion years ago. In contrast to the more primitive cells that started to exist during the Archean, eukaryotic cells are unique because of compartments that are found within the cells themselves, typically behaving like cells within a cell. Now, we don't really know how eukaryotic cells came to be, but we do have a theory, and it is known as the endosymbiotic theory. The endosymbiotic theory states that some of the organelles or compartments in eukaryotic cells were once prokaryotic bacteria, and that these bacteria were engulfed by a larger bacteria. The cells are believed to have become interdependent with each other, and since the relationship was mutually beneficial, it eventually became permanent. Eventually, the eukaryotic cells started living in colonies or groups, and then they developed specialized structures that turned them into multicellular organisms. The development of multicellular organisms is believed to have happened 1.5 billion years ago, and this led to the second wave of diversification of life on planet Earth. It was during this time that choanoflagellates, a group of free-living unicellular and colonial flagellate eukaryotes, started to exist.
Wow!
And these organisms are still alive until now, and they are believed to be the closest single-celled living relatives of animals. Fun fact: the existence of multicellular organism was believed to have been facilitated by changes in the structure of the cell membrane of cells that allow them to stick with each other and to communicate with each other. Scientists have, in fact, found a unique portion of our DNA that may have resulted to the formation of multicellular structures, and it is called the CCD domain. Now, going back to the rise of the Ediacarans, that supposedly happened during the end of the Proterozoic Eon about 1 billion to 542 million years ago. As a reminder, this is the point in Earth's history when our earliest common ancestor, Eukaryote, existed. During this period, these soft-bodied organisms were also discovered to have learned to eat each other, in the process known as predation. And with that, we move on to the Phanerozoic Eon, which is the current geologic eon that began with the Paleozoic Era that started about 524 to 251 million years ago. The striking event of the Paleozoic Era is the Cambrian explosion, which was not a volcanic eruption. It was an event where practically all major animal groups started appearing in the fossil record. The rise of the bilaterians also happened during the Paleozoic Era. Bilaterians are animals with bilateral symmetry, wherein their left and right sides are mirror images of each other. Together with having a complete one-way digestive tract where you eat food through your mouth and poop it out through your bilaterians are considered to be one step up the evolutionary ladder. During the Cambrian explosion, sponges, cnidarians such as jellyfish and hydras, and mollusks like snails and slugs appeared earlier than other animals. It was also during this time when the Ediacaran animals started to dwindle and go extinct, possibly due to competition for resources with more complex organisms, altered predator-prey relationships that they couldn't adjust to, or even the continued increase in atmospheric oxygen. The Paleozoic Era was also the time when land was colonized by animals. Though the mechanisms for the colonization of land are still being discovered, it was approximated to have happened about 500 million years ago. But the move to land led to arthropods or insects to becoming the more dominant animal group, together with the tetrapods, four-limbed animals such as amphibians and reptiles. Following the Paleozoic Era was the more popular Mesozoic Era, which was approximated to have occurred sometime between 251 to 65.5 million years ago. During this time, coral reefs were believed to have emerged and played host to a rich biodiversity of fish and marine organisms. It was also during this time when the ancestors of plesiosaurs, gigantic aquatic dinosaurs, returned to the water. And speaking of dinosaurs, the Mesozoic is by far one of the most famous eras because it is known as the Age of Reptiles, when dinosaurs roamed freely all over the earth. Lesser known to the general audience, however, is the fact that the first mammals also emerged during the Mesozoic Era. And then we finally reach the Cenozoic Era, which started about 65.5 million years ago and is ongoing until today. The Cenozoic Era is characterized by a mass extinction event that led to our loss of large non-flying dinosaurs and marine reptiles.
No! No!
But it was the absence of dinosaurs that led to the mammals increasing in size and in population, possibly to compensate for the vacated ecological roles that the dinosaurs left behind. Interestingly enough, the Cenozoic Era is also known for major global cooling events that led to several ice ages. As the Cenozoic Era continues, however, ironically enough, or perhaps not, we are also experiencing significant global warming events. And that's it for now on our discussion on the history and evolution of animals. Just remember, animals have roamed planet Earth for about 1 billion years, and we have more than 1.3 million identified species, but more are still unknown. Much of what we know about the history of animals come from the fossil record, which is usually embedded in sedimentary rock and with its age determined using radioactive decay. The Earth also has 4 known eons. The Hadean Eon, when the Earth was formed and spent its time mostly as a molten ball of rock. The Archean Eon, when the Earth cooled and allowed for the formation of the first single-celled life forms. The Proterozoic Eon, where life became more complicated because of oxygen and started becoming multicellular. And finally, the Phanerozoic Eon that we share with dinosaurs, mass extinction events, global cooling, and global warming. I hope you were able to learn something from our short trip down Earth's memory lane. If you want to learn more about animal evolution, then please come back next week. And if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please don't hesitate to message me, your resident Filipino scientist, in the comments section below. Thank you very much, and see you around!